So guys, this may be a little bit of a longer video. I always intended to post a video with like a final preview of the Leeds bill, if you like, you know, some sort of final predictions, that sort of thing. But I'm going to kind of do two videos in one here. We're going to do a final look at the bill, we're going to do some predictions, but importantly we're also going to talk about the weigh-in. You know, a lot of these bills, you go along to the weigh-in, you watch the weigh-in on TV, and you learn nothing. But sometimes weigh-ins and what happens at weigh-ins can be very revealing and potentially give some clues as to how things are going to go down the night afterwards. I believe today's weigh-ins on a number of the key fights are potentially relevant in terms of making predictions for who's going to win and how fights are going to play out. Let's start with the main event, Josh Warrington versus Patrick Hyland. Patrick Hyland, clearly the bigger man of the two, a man who's always been known as a very big featherweight, weighed in 2.5 pounds heavy. Now, I watched an interview on IFL TV with Josh Warrington, where Josh Warrington is saying what an advantage it is to him that Patrick Hyland has weighed in heavy. It's going to give him a psychological edge. It's going to mean Hyland spending the next 2 hours trying to lose weight. It's going to mean Hyland's a bit more drained. I suspected at the time of watching that video that Warrington had got himself confused. And now I'm even more convinced. Because importantly, when Hyland came back for his second weigh-in, he weighed exactly the same as the initial weigh-in. That is to say, he has weighed in 2.5 pounds heavy. Now, I presume certain sanctions will fall on Hyland's head for this. I presume he may face a fine. I presume some of the number one ranking positions this fight was for, maybe some of the minor belts it were for, will no longer be up for grabs for Patrick Hyland. But that doesn't necessarily mean it won't affect the value of the fight. When I looked at Patrick Hyland today, I saw a much bigger man than Josh Warrington. I saw a man who was in very good physical condition. And I saw a man who made absolutely no effort to lose that extra 2.5 pounds. He's not doing what Josh Warrington thinks he's doing. He's not going backstage and throwing up and sitting in a steam room trying to lose the weight, killing himself. He's chilled. He's making no effort to lose that weight. What Josh Warrington has is a guy who, to my eye, has made a conscious decision to weigh in heavy. I'm not saying he intended to weigh in heavy as a tactic. I'm saying it's got close to the fight and he's decided not to make weight because it's going to be too difficult. You know, that's my reading of this. He's decided to come in 2.5 pounds heavy. 2.5 pounds at that weight is a lot to miss weight by. You know, you see people missing weight by an ounce. You see people missing weight by half a pound. 2.5 pounds is a lot in professional boxing in the featherweight division. For me, that is a conscious tactical decision that it's got to 2 weeks out, it's got to 1 week out, and he's thought, do you know what? I'm not going to weight this weight comfortably. I'm going to come in heavy, you know. And 2.5 pounds is a lot. You know, it may not sound like a lot, but if you know boxing, 2.5 pounds is really, really relevant. For a start, these are featherweights. They're not men like you. They're not men like I. They're 9 stone blokes. 2.5 pounds. If I lost 2.5 pounds, you probably wouldn't notice it in my face or my physique, you know. 2.5 pounds when you're 9 stone is a much bigger percentage of your body weight. You know, clearly, just mathematically. Also, you're looking at a guy in Patrick Hyland who's been big at the weight for years. You're looking at a guy who has suffered to get down to that weight limit for fight after fight after fight. Potentially, him not making that effort, potentially him carrying that extra 2.5 pounds, means he's going to be less dehydrated. It's going to mean he's got more energy. It's going to mean he's got more snap behind his punches. It's going to give him a speed advantage. You know, it could be really, really relevant. If you can't lose any more weight, to go and lose 2.5 pounds is a killer. Literally, in some cases. You know, this 2.5 pounds I see as a significant advantage to Hyland, who's the bigger man anyway. You know, I'm not saying it's necessarily going to change the course of the fight. But I think it's certainly something to consider. Certainly something to consider. You know, this fight has been criticised as being a terrible fight by many people. Even on my own podcast, a few of the panel think it's a terrible fight. I am not so critical of it, and that's before this weight situation. I think Hyland is potentially underrated in this fight. You know, Hyland was terrible against Gary Russell Jr. Gary Russell Jr. made him look really basic. But Gary Russell Jr. is one of the best fighters in the world at his division. Gary Russell Jr. is an elite world-level operator. I don't see anything comparable about Gary Russell Jr. and Josh Warrington. I don't see anything comparable in style. I don't see anything comparable in attributes. And fundamentally, I don't see anything comparable in terms of class and the level that I expect the two to operate at. You know, Warrington's a decent fighter, but Warrington, at the minute, is some way below proving he's elite level. You know, you look at the elite, you look at Gary Russell Jr., Lomachenko, I know he's maybe moving up. You look at Lee Selby, Carl Frampton, Leo Santa Cruz. You look at the attributes those guys have. You look at the skill sets they have. You look at the performances they've put on. I've not seen anything from Josh Warrington to make me think he belongs in that class. There's quite a few featherweights domestically I'd pick to beat him. You know, potentially you look at the Walsh brothers. Potentially you look at Mitchell Smith. Certainly you look at the likes of Lee Selby. You know, there's names out there I'd pick to beat Warrington, even domestically. You know, Warrington's a good fighter, and he's improved a lot. In the last 3 or 4 fights, he saw real improvement. But fundamentally, this is not a slick boxer. This is not a guy with excellent boxing pedigree. This is a guy with limited power, who comes straight forward in a predictable manner, who exerts pressure, and who throws weak, looping, wide punches. You know, he is no killer whatsoever. Hyland's been in there with a better class of opposition. He's been in there with guys who hit a lot harder. He's got a lot of experience. And for me, it's very possible that Hyland will prove to be the better boxer from the outside. You know, Hyland is not a terrible boxer from the outside. I know he has not really beaten anyone of mega note in his career. But if you look at him, just based on the eye test, Hyland has got a few tricks and a few skills and a lot of experience boxing on the outside, which is for me where Warrington is really vulnerable. You know, if Warrington can get this fight into a phone booth and grind away and wear Hyland down with his high punch output and his high aggression, he's probably going to win the fight. But if Hyland can use his footwork, use his jab, try and keep this boxing lengthy to an extent, I think Warrington's in real trouble. You know, I don't think Hyland is out of his depth here at all, actually. You know, I make Warrington a slight favourite here. Momentum in boxing is very key. Warrington's an unbeaten fighter who's been on an absolute streak. Hyland's a guy coming off a devastating loss. You know, Warrington's the money man in front of the huge lead crowds. You know, he's got everything in front of him. He's got a lot to lose. You know, Hyland may be at that point in his career where maybe he's becoming a high-class opponent. But, you know, so what I'm getting at is Warrington deserves to be a favourite. But this is a tight fight. The closer I get to the fight, this is a competitive fight. This is a fight I'm actually looking forward to. This is a fight that could go either way for me. We've got a real clash of styles here. You know, you've got a presser fighter in Josh Warrington versus an outside boxer in Hyland. And the presser fighter in Warrington has weaknesses to his game that can potentially be exploited by someone with the outside game of Hyland, someone with the experience of Hyland. And frankly, this weight decision, for me, you know, increases Hyland's chance. You know, if he needs to keep Warrington off him, being less strained at the weight, being a bit thicker, being a bit stronger, is going to be of huge benefit to him. You know, it really is. Warrington looked very drained for me at the weight limit. And despite the fact he looked drained, he looked so much smaller. And you know, it's not like Hyland's gone and spent 6 months in Burger King. He didn't roll up heavy with a belly on him. He still looked in very good nick to me. I think this could be an upset. You know, if you put a gun to my head and said I have to make a prediction, and for the purposes of this channel I always make a prediction, the percentage call is Josh Warrington to win on points and to maybe come on stronger and grind it out on Hyland. But do not be surprised whatsoever. I give Hyland a real chance in this fight. I give him a 30 to 40% chance. And I think this weight thing was relevant. You know, you look at Warrington saying it's an advantage, it's a psychological advantage. Hyland's going to be backstage trying to lose the weight desperately. You know, it's nonsense. Nonsense. For me, it was a tactical decision from Hyland, the bigger man naturally. And potentially we could be seeing a man who has been killing himself, draining down to the weight for years, fighting at a more natural weight class for him. It's an interesting dynamic to me. I think this could be a tight fight. I think there's potential for an upset, but the percentage call, momentum is so key in boxing, and the percentage call is Warrington points. But it's a fight that I'm finding more intriguing, and don't be surprised whatsoever if Patrick Hyland pulls the upset. Let's talk about some of the other fights, because I think there were multiple interesting weigh-ins today. I'll touch on Frankie Gavin for a minute. I mean, what on earth is this fight? This is horrendous. I don't have the guy's record in front of me, Frankie Gavin's fighting. In fact, I don't even know his name. But let's put it this way. There are multiple people watching this video who are in better physical condition than Frankie Gavin. You know, I hate to be arrogant about it, but I believe I'm in substantially better physical condition than Frankie Gavin, a guy who was competing for world titles relatively recently. Frankie Gavin has always been a very small welterweight. He's always been a welterweight who I have believed should be fighting at the 10 stone division, the light welterweight division, if he had a bit more discipline. At this weigh-in today, he looked terrible. He looked terrible. Now, I am not suggesting for 1 second that boxing is a body beautiful contest. You know, I'm one of these who've said in the past that Tyson Fury's body is more functional for boxing than Anthony Joshua's. But you can determine certain things from a man's physique. And looking at Frankie Gavin's physique today, he did not look like a man who had been training hard for a fight. You know, visible fat, love handles, very, very limited definition. You know, very limited definition. You know, he looked like a guy who was off the couch. He looked like a guy who wasn't in shape whatsoever. Frankie Gavin, the welterweight, 10 stone 7, who should be a light welterweight in my opinion, 10 stone, weighed in 11 stone 1. 11 stone 1. He weighed in just above the light middleweight limit. Frankie Gavin weighed in for this fight as a middleweight. You know, crazy stuff. And look at his opponent. His opponent was tiny. You know, the opponent's got a losing record. Frankie Gavin should have way too much class, even if he hasn't trained a day. But his opponent, you know, Frankie Gavin looks like a light welterweight. This guy looked like a super featherweight. You know, Frankie Gavin was looming over him like a giant. You know, if you didn't know what the size of Frankie Gavin, you'd think he was 6 foot. I'm not expecting the Frankie Gavin fight even to be televised, to be honest, but it's something to look out for. You know, if Frankie Gavin turns up in a big fight later on in the year, it's something to remember that he's been in this bad physical condition at this stage of the year. You know, potentially it's relevant. Another guy I want to touch on was Luke Campbell. I was at the Luke Campbell weigh-in when he fought. I've temporarily forgotten the guy's name. Is it Mendy? Even Mendy. I was at the Campbell weigh-in when he fought Mendy. He looked terrible that day. I spoke to him after the weigh-in. He was gasping for water. He had one of those, you know, the Maxi Muscle bottles that are, I don't know, a bottle and a half size, you know, the big ones. He was literally necking it. He was so dehydrated. He looked terrible in terms of at the weight that day. I believe he may have even missed weight and looked that bad. You know, he looked so dehydrated, and speaking to him afterwards, you could tell he wasn't in a good way. I wasn't surprised at all he lost that fight to even Mendy. You know, Mendy's the kind of guy who's going to make you work hard. He's going to push you. He's going to be real rough and tough in there. And for me, Campbell was a skeleton at the weigh-in that day. And he's always been a big lightweight, Campbell. And for me, I know he's got a lot of personal circumstances outside of the ring. There's poor health in his family. For me, he wasn't there that day, largely because of the weight. You know, he was in a real bad way to my eye at that weigh-in. And as I say, speaking to him afterwards, he didn't look good. Today, he looked sharp at the weigh-in. He looked strong. He looked carved in iron at the weigh-in today. He looked in a real good state. Very, very, very physically fit. Very strong. Very powerful at the weight. Expect a big performance from Campbell tomorrow. Having met him at the weigh-in last time, I believe his performance against Mendy was largely due to that messing up the weight. And I believe this time round, that won't be a factor. And we're going to see more snap, more speed, more precision, more energy from Luke Campbell. So, yeah, I guess to look at those fights again, Warrington Hyland, I'm thinking that the Hyland coming in heavy is really relevant and potentially makes the fight even closer. I'm thinking Campbell's looking strong and he's going to put in an improved performance. And I'm thinking Frankie Gavin needs to sort himself out. Let's talk about two of the other fights, actually. Dillian Whyte versus Dave Allen. Now, Dillian Whyte weighed in at 17 stone 7, I believe. If you're a Dillian Whyte fan, that's good news. He weighed in excess of 18 stone for the Bukurian fight, where he looked pretty terrible. He was visibly more defined today. You could see there'd been half a stone of fat come off him. And I'd like to see him drop even more, to be honest. I'd like to see him closer to 17 stone. I think there's still a lot to come off, and I think that would help with his conditioning and stamina in fights. You know, he doesn't need to get down to 16 stone and be all six-pack looking, but, you know, there's still more stuff to come off him. And yeah, he looked a lot better today, Dillian Whyte. It impressed me that he's lost over half a stone from his last fight against Bukurian, which was only, a month or so ago. He's a similar height to Dave Allen. He's a more powerful bloke than Dave Allen physically. You know, Dave Allen weighed in at 16, the best part of 17 stone. I think Dave Allen was 16 stone, 13 pounds and a couple of ounces, whereas Dillian was 17.7. So, you know, Dillian's half a stone heavier on the scales, but for me, Dillian's a much more powerful man. Allen at 17 stone was carrying a little bit of extra weight on him, and Dillian had a much bigger frame. He looked like a stronger, more powerfully built bloke than Dave Allen, which I guess we could have expected anyway. But Dillian Whyte looked good to me. You know, if I was betting on Dillian Whyte tomorrow, I'd be pleased with how the weigh-in went today. I think it's I think one of my key criticisms of Dillian Whyte has been that he hasn't turned up to fights in the best shape, and that hasn't exposed him too much because he's ended his fights rather quickly. But when he's gone round, he's looked a bit slow, he's been a bit inaccurate, and I believed getting a bit fitter, getting a bit more in shape would potentially help. And certainly it's a positive for Dillian Whyte that he has come in half a stone lighter and looking in physically better condition. Let's talk before we head off about Coyle Nurse, which is an excellent fight. I don't know what Tommy Coyle's doing at light welterweight. For me, Coyle was never a big lightweight. You look at Coyle versus Campbell. Campbell looked a weight class above him. Coyle could still make lightweight. You know, he was making it comfortably. And for me, moving up to light welterweight was because he'd kind of run out of ideas. You know, he'd had a few losses. Lightweight was quite stacked. I'll come back at light welterweight. You know, there was no more reason to it than that as far as I can see. I can't see any logical reason why he's fighting at 140. Tommy Coyle's a guy who's in good shape. You know, he's always in good shape. He trains very hard. He works very hard. He looks very good on the scales. But he's just not a light welterweight. He's a small guy. He's a short guy. Tyrone Nurse, you know, is a much, much bigger man than him. He's just a taller, rangier, scopier individual. For me, Tyrone Nurse's style is the kryptonite to Tommy Coyle. Tommy Coyle is a quite crude, quite a basic, come-forward boxer. Tyrone Nurse is slick. He's skilled. He's slippery. He's got footwork on another level. He's got some defensive slickness to another level. He's got a jab. He's got combinations. Tyrone Nurse isn't the biggest puncher. Coyle's got heart. He's tough. Tyrone Nurse should really pick him apart. Tyrone Nurse should really box this fight on the back foot. He should be landing with crisp, clean combinations and circling around Coyle. Tyrone Nurse should prove he's a level above this. You know, Tyrone Nurse is the kind of fighter I've wanted to see get a push for some time now. Potentially move well above British level, whether that's European level, whether that's potentially lower world level. I think there's a lot out there for Tyrone Nurse. There's elements to work on in his game, but he's got real skill. And every time I watch him, I think, this is a guy capable of better. This is a guy who is really silky in there. He kind of reminds me of a Malik Scott at heavyweight, you know. And I think he's going to have too much for Tommy Coyle. I think the step up in weight isn't sensible from Coyle. I think it's because they've run out of ideas rather than some sort of strong tactical decision to go up to 140. And I think that stylistically, being the bigger man, being the better mover, being the more educated boxer, Tyrone Nurse is going to have far too much and should win a points decision relatively comfortably. You know, Coyle's not terrible. He may pick up a few rounds. He may look good in spots. He's got heart. He's got passion, you know, but I don't think he's got the skill. I don't think he's got the size to trouble Tyrone Nurse fundamentally. So, yeah, just a few thoughts for you guys. I thought today's weigh-in was more revealing than most. You know, I'll give big pluses here to Tyrone Nurse. I give pluses to Dillian Whyte. I give pluses to Patrick Hyland. And I give pluses to Luke Campbell, actually. I think there were some fighters there who've got themselves in good nick. I thought Campbell and Whyte particularly have improved their physical conditioning since when I've seen them fight before. I think that'll be certainly to their benefit. I thought Patrick Hyland played a smart tactical game. I thought Tyrone Nurse is going to be too big. And the Frankie Gavin one, you know, don't know whether to laugh or cry. Let me know your thoughts, guys. What things did you take from the weigh-in today? I may try and do another video after the Santa Cruz Frampton weigh-in if, you know, if there's anything particularly noteworthy that emerges from that. Let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please do support it by subscribing. Many thanks for watching. Cheers.